these are the these are the lecture notes for chapter 4 on fungi, and this is the first little part of the notes. So let's get started. So we're learning about fungi now. We moved from the kingdom Protista to the kingdom fungi. You've got a lot of information on this page, so let's see what's important. Okay. All right. It says fungi is a kingdom, so make sure you know that. The fungi are, like everything that we're studying at this point, the fungi are members of the domain Eukarya. So the kingdom fungi includes an enormous variety of living organisms, and collectively they're all referred to as Eukomycota. Fossil evidence shows that fungi appeared about 450 million years ago, compared to billions of years ago, a few billions of years ago for the archaea and the bacteria. Fungi are, not unlike plants, which are autotrophic, fungi are heterotrophs. As far as reproduction, there are some fungi. In fact, the way that they classify the different phyla of fungi is that they use the reproduction structures. So we go over the reproduction cycles of the fungi in each of the fungal groups. Some fungi multiply they only do asexual reproduction, and some do both asexual and sexual reproduction. So it just depends on the fungus whether it's asexual reproduction or sexual reproduction or a mix of both. They do show an alternation of generations sometimes, even though we really just associate an alternation of generations with plants. But they do show that same alternation of generations. So we will be going through life cycles, just like we're going to do with plants. Most fungi produce a large number of spores, and the spores are haploid. And this is a little bit different because when we learned mitosis in Bio 111, it was a diploid parent cell producing two diploid daughter cells, in other words, clones of the parent. But in fungi, the haploid cells can undergo mitosis to form many haploid individuals, so a multicellular haploid structure. So if mitosis occurs in a haploid cell, it's only got half the chromosomes of the parent cell. So it's going to be a haploid cell that makes many copies of itself that are also haploid. So what you have is basically a parent cell that's haploid. In humans, haploid would be 23 chromosomes rather than 46. And then the daughter cells that are produced are haploid. It's still mitosis. It's just instead of diploid to diploid, it's haploid to haploid. And you probably know this, that fungi play a very important role as decomposers in our environment. Goodness. Okay, so fungal cells do contain a nucleus, so they are eukaryotes. They do see, as far as their chromosomes, the nucleus is wrapped around histone proteins, and some can have bacterial plasmids, not bacterial plasmids. They can have plasmids like bacteria have, which is a very small loop of DNA. But they rarely have horizontal transfer. In other words, remember, horizontal transfer is not from parent to offspring, but from one organism to another. Fungal cells do contain mitochondria, and they contain a lot of organelles that have membrane-bound organelles like endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi apparatus. They don't have chloroplast or chlorophyll. They do not undergo photosynthesis like plants. And the reason we're comparing them to plants and animals is there's some similarities to animals in the fact that they're heterotrophic. And then there's some similarities to plants in the fact that they kind of look a little bit like a plant, except they're not usually green. But their pigments in fungi, speaking of them, some of them have bright colors. You've seen some that are you know, have a boring regular color, like kind of grayish or white or brown. But there are fungi that have bright colors like red, green, black, orange, yellow. And these pigments, rather than absorbing light and carrying out photosynthesis, are associated with the cell wall and protect the fungi from ultraviolet radiation. So the pigments have a protective function rather than photosynthesis. Okay, and by the way, I did not underline a lot of information. You can pretty much stick to what I underline as far as what you need to focus on. I did talk about everything on this slide, but so I mentioned it, but what I underline is most important. Okay, so we know that fungal cells have plasma membranes or cell membranes because all cells do. But fungal cells do have a cell wall. It's a very thick cell wall, and the primary chemical in that cell wall is chitin. There is one molecule that helps stabilize the plasma membrane that we don't haven't seen in other organisms except fungi. It's called ergosterol. It's a steroid, as like it sounds like it is. Most members of the kingdom fungi are non-motile. The only time you see members of the kingdom fungi, swimming or having a flagella and swimming is usually the gametes. The sperm and the female gamete can be like a sperm and have a flagella. So a lot of times the gametes, female and male gametes, will have flagella, particularly in the phylum Chytridiomycota, which I normally shorten and call that phylum Chytrid, the chytrids. All right. So what we're seeing here is a picture of I have to look at the word to say it. The species name is Amanita muscaria. Amanita muscaria. I'm going to write it. Is it on here? No. Okay, so I'm going to write it for you. You don't have to memorize this, but just some information, give you a little bit extra information. That is a mushroom called Amanita muscaria. It has a red cap with little white attachment, little white dots on it. And a lot of times those bright colors mean poisonous in nature, and that one is poisonous. That one is definitely a poisonous mushroom that you would not want to eat. It's talking about here that fungi can be found in a lot of different habitats. Primarily, we're going to see members of the kingdom fungi on the forest floor. Almost all of them are on the forest floor, but and play their major role, of course. Well, I already said that, but they play a major role as decomposers in nature. But there are some examples here that there are some fungi that can cause infections in humans, human skin and mucous membranes. It's not fun to think about, but yeast infections, in the genital region of males and females, actually, particularly little baby boys can get yeast infections because of the diaper and the moisture and all that. And there's a yeast infection in the mouth called thrush. And then there's yeast we use to make bread. So those are different environments that fungi can grow in other than on the forest floor. And then here's an example, see if I can say this, Coccidioides imitatus. And this species actually is a parasite of coral reefs in the ocean. As far as nutrition, we know fungi are heterotrophs. With animals and humans ingest their food, they eat their food, and then it enters the stomach and the intestines and is digested. So in fungi, the digestion part comes first, because they don't have a stomach, and then they ingest by absorbing the digested food from the environment. So they secrete enzymes into their environment, and that breaks down the food that they breaks down the organic material in their environment. And then once that material is broken down and digested, they can absorb the smaller molecules. Another thing that makes them similar to animals is I don't know if you remember this, but glucose, when cells accumulate a lot of glucose, they will store that glucose as starch in plants. Starch is a polysaccharide, glucose is a monosaccharide. But animals store glucose, blood sugar is what we call it. Animals store glucose as glycogen, and so do fungi. So that's a similarity to animals. Saprobes, or sorry, my phone. Saprophytes, just that sometimes you'll see that written as saprophytes, but sapro is the prefix you'll see, is organisms that derive nutrients from decaying organic matter, which is mainly plant material like leaves on the forest floor. It's a type of decomposer. And then they release elements like nitrogen and carbon into the environment by decomposing, decomposing those molecules. All right, some fungi are parasites, and they can infect plants, and they can also infect animals. Some examples are smuts and rust. I'll add that one. Smuts and rust can infect plants, especially certain crops. Dutch elm disease affects elm trees. And then human fungal infections include thrush. That's a fungus called Candida, or the condition thrush is candidiasis, and some fungi can infect nematodes, which are roundworms. And roundworms, we don't like roundworms very much. Roundworms cause infections in plants and also our pets, like heartworms and pinworms and hookworms. All right, so what we're seeing here is an image of yeast. They're little round cells, they're unicellular. And it's just telling you that fungi can be unicellular and they can be multicellular. Most of the unicellular are the yeast, and one of the most common species is Candida, and that's what you're seeing in the picture. But most fungi are multicellular, like a mushroom. Okay, so most fungi are multicellular organisms. They do have a vegetative stage, and that stage consists of thread-like structures called hyphae. And then they have a reproductive stage that sometimes, when it says more conspicuous, it means that's what you see a lot of times in nature. So the mushroom, the mushroom that we see growing, on a forest floor is the fruiting body. But that's the reproductive stage, and that's the most conspicuous stage of the mushroom. The hyphae tend to grow underground. This picture is showing you a mass of hyphae, and a mass of hyphae are called the mycelium. That's a mass of hyphae. So the mass of hyphae in a fungus is called the mycelium. Here we see several different types of hyphae. On the left, what we see is hyphae that contain a septa. They're septated, or they have divisions in between the cells. And then here, what the brown dots are is the nucleus of the cells. And then here we see hyphae that have all these. They're multinucleate, but they don't have septa. They don't have dividers. And it gives you some examples. The hyphae in bread molds are not separated by septa,